Welcome back, 1570 AM WNST Baltimore Positive. No one more positive than my next guest, the great Luke Jones. Luke, welcome in.
Dennis, how are you, my friend?
I am fantastic, my friend. As much as I'm trying to get away from the Lamar Jackson conversation, it's picking up steam. First, you had Ed Reed. Now you got Terrell Suggs. My hashtag is pay the man. This story continues to grow. It's getting bigger by the week. It's not going away.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it means anything for what's going to happen in reality between the Ravens and Lamar Jackson. I think you and I joked about this back in training camp. When Lamar first confirmed that there would be a week one deadline, that we said, okay, if Steve Bisciotti called up Lamar Jackson and said, look, we'll give you what you want. We kind of joked at the time that might mean that Lamar is playing better than ever and looking like the MVP. And Lamar might say, well, you know what that number was back on August 15th? That's not the number anymore on October 1st. So that aside,
Right.
It's very clear what this guy has done.
And there is a number.
understand.
I saw, not to cut you off, but I saw Sport Track today, 261.1 million over 6 years. Now, they can't use the word guarantee, but if I'm
Right.
Lamar Jackson, that's what I just take a picture of that. If I hear from Steve or Eric, I take a picture of that and say, listen, here's a number. The only thing that's missing is guaranteed. You do that, you know what? I'll see you at what time would you like me in your office today? If you can't do that, then there's nothing to talk about.
Right. And that's what it really comes down to. And again, it comes down to how important is a fully guaranteed contract to Lamar Jackson, and how important is it to the Ravens to not give out a fully guaranteed contract? If those answers haven't changed, and I guess hypothetically, we don't know it hasn't been confirmed publicly what the answers are to those questions, but just reading the tea leaves and understanding how this has gone, if those answers haven't changed, then there's still nothing to talk about. But in the meantime, Lamar's value just continues to get higher. And this is with conversations I've had with you, with Nestor, with other people in my life that I've talked to, just other media types, other people that understand finances and markets and things of that nature. That's why I kept asking the question, what really constitutes a win in this negotiation for the Ravens that doesn't come across as a loss from a football standpoint? Whether he's playing poorly or whether, heaven forbid, he does have that small percentage chance of a career-altering kind of injury. Other than that, I just feel like the cost is just going to keep going up. And that's the same is true for Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow and any other young or not even just young, just elite quarterbacks as they go on. We know the TV money kicking in. We're going to watch Thursday Night Football on Amazon Prime. We're all figuring out how to do that. And there's going to be more TV money coming in. So, for all the talk about the cap going down during the pandemic temporarily, we knew that was only going to be a short-term kind of thing. So, again, you look at it and you just say, okay, I mean, I understand it. And let's be clear. Something we're talking about this week, Ronnie Stanley just practicing fully for the first time since coming back to practice at the beginning of September. Maybe he plays on Sunday, maybe he doesn't, but it appears his return is much sooner rather than later. Now, we don't know what that's going to look like. And in a big picture sense, we've talked about those questions. So there is, if you're the Ravens, there is a very painful reminder of that wasn't even a fully guaranteed deal, but clearly they gave Ronnie Stanley a lot of guaranteed money. And you see what can happen. So I understand the Ravens' perspective here. At the same time, you can talk about negotiating in a vacuum and reality and what it means for other players and what it means for the other 30 teams. I would say 31, but we know the Browns are the ones that put the Ravens in this mess to begin with. But at the same time, you have this unbelievable talent who is currently leading the league in touchdown passes. He's tied for third in the AFC in rushing, leading the league in yards per carry, leading the league in passer rating. I mean, it's Shohei Ohtani, Aaron Judge like when you're talking about using a baseball example. So at some point in time, we think there's going to be a breaking point, and you can talk all you want about, well, the Ravens can tag him for a couple of years, but as we mentioned, does it get to a point where if the fully guaranteed deal is truly what Lamar Jackson is set on getting, where he just says, okay, well, trade me to another team that I think will be willing to do it? So
And,
And I assume
and he'll have plenty of suitors. There's no doubt
I,
about that.
I mean, even if there's not plenty, it takes one, right? I mean, the Browns proved this with Deshaun Watson, who certainly wasn't in the position Lamar is now. So again, there's so many other different things to talk about, but this is still a story because you're talking about a guy who's having another incredible season. And I want to be very clear on this. Lamar has to keep this going, and I don't mean that in a sense that I'm diminishing what he did. It's just the opposite. It is incredibly difficult to do what he's doing right now. I saw JT O'Sullivan, who does the quarterback school, YouTube videos, which I remember famously. I'm pretty sure you and I even talked about the one he did after the Buffalo playoff loss, and we kind of talked about the fact that there's a lot wrong that Lamar did in that game. As much as everyone focused on the receivers or the offensive line, and look, they played their part too. And Greg Roman and the scheme, he did a video on this game that they just did, or that they just won in New England. And boy, Lamar Jackson is in complete command of this offense. The passing concepts have grown more sophisticated. Greg Roman deserves some credit on that front, but
Absolutely.
let's face it, playing with their fourth string left tackle. There's no Marshall Yanda on this offensive line. I think Tyler Linderbaum's going to be a heck of a player, but he's still a rookie. There's a lot going on that O line.
You're all over it. The offensive line, right? He's not playing behind 5 Pro Bowl / All Pro players. Even more impressive.
Right, but and to be clear, to be fair to those guys, as much as we've talked about the run game, the pass protection has been good. It's been quite good overall over these first 3 weeks. But you have that, and certainly as we welcome the Buffalo Bills to Baltimore on Sunday, he doesn't have a Stephon Diggs that he's thrown to. Now, he does have a Mark Andrews, and I think that's very fair to point that out. And Devin Duvernay certainly has taken a nice step forward. But we're not talking about a group of top 5 caliber in the NFL in terms of their collection of pass catchers. So everything he's doing.
Yep.
No Pro Bowl running back at this point, like Mark Ingram in 2019. So maybe J.K. Dobbins will look like that later in the year. Justice Hills looked pretty good, but there's a lot that you could say. There's a lot to be desired with the rest of this offense on paper, but it hasn't mattered. Lamar Jackson has just been that good, seeing the whole field. He's in command of the whole offense. Shotgun, pistol, under center now. Everything he's doing at an incredibly high level. And I think what's interesting, Dennis, is for people who have been so hung up on what needs to be better. And look, there's been nuanced, fair, reasonable criticisms of Lamar Jackson or this offense in its totality without just reverting to the stupid, he's a running back kind of stuff, which I still don't know how many people are even saying that at this point. I think it's like a vocal, it's a vocal silent minority. Yeah.
Same people.
But I think that's a shrinking number of people. But the point is, we are seeing an offense that is slowly but surely becoming much more conventional. Now, is it conventional? No. Is it more conventional than it was 3 years ago? Absolutely, because you're seeing, look at the kind of game neutral situations. They have a much higher passing rate. They're not this team that's running the ball 55, 60% of the time anymore. They've thrown the ball a lot. So you certainly want to be in a position not to be where they were in the fourth quarter of the Miami game, where they could have been running the ball if they ran it more successfully and could have protected that lead a little more effectively. But the point is, this is becoming a much more conventional looking offense than it did a few years ago. And if you're not paying attention to that, it's like John Harbaugh said after the game on Sunday, can't help you anymore. I mean, this guy's answering every question, and we can debate where he ranks among pure passers, but it's certainly not at the bottom, or it's well above average. It's he's passing at a very high level right now, and that's not even taking into account he's averaging 9.3 yards per carry. So you just look at the whole package and you just say, wow. I mean, this guy in a contract year, all the pressure, all the scrutiny, how every week would be a referendum one week or the other, or one way or the other as it pertains to a contract. If he were having a slow start to the season, he's just going out there and he's just setting the league on fire at this point. So he's got to keep it going, just to keep this conversation at this level. But not to say that he's going to throw 3 touchdowns every single week, or be responsible for 5 every single week like he was on Sunday, counting the rushing score. But he's off to a really special start, and some of the things that we're seeing now are not things that he was doing back in 2019, which should absolutely terrify the rest of the league.
Luke, every year Ford Motor Company sends its 3,000 plus dealers a survey, a poll. And one of the questions they ask is, do you see the value of your franchise going up in the next 5 years, 10 years, et cetera? There's only 32 NFL teams. The value of the franchises has skyrocketed, right? Now we're having Amazon Prime, as you mentioned, Thursday Night Football. As time travel speeds up, the airplanes are getting faster, as we can get across the pond in 3.5 hours commercially. As the NFL puts a team in London, perhaps Frankfurt, and they become a global brand, you can't help but think that these franchises are going to be worth 10, 15, 20 billion dollars at some point, which to me kind of helps Lamar's cause in that, okay, I'm looking for, in comparison, it's a fraction of the value of the franchise.
Yeah, no question about it. And that's why, you and I have talked about this before. I know that, even if we're going to step away from the fully guaranteed part of this conversation, and if you have a forward thinking quarterback and whoever his representation is, and we know Lamar doesn't have a certified agent, but just speaking in a more general sense, that's why I've wondered if the next step beyond just talking about a fully guaranteed deal, and obviously you see the value and why a player would want that, but because of what you just mentioned, I do wonder if the next forward thinking kind of negotiating is tied into percentage of the cap, or,
Sure.
which by extension is percentage of the value of the franchise. So, that's where I wonder if that's kind of will be the new frontier, and whether it's Lamar or any other, young star quarterback in this league that kind of thinks about it in those terms. Because you're right. I mean, I always go back. I do go back to Mark Cuban saying about a decade ago that pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, and that
Yes.
whole thing with the NFL. And I hear certain elements of that. There are certain things that bug me. I'll give you a perfect example. NFL Game Pass, what 5 years ago was an extraordinary product. All
Sure.
22, all these different things you could do with it. You could click on a play from the play-by-play, and it would go to the play. And it's kind of it's evolved. It's kind of disintegrated into NFL Plus, which is a pain in the what if you're trying to watch the all 22, because there's no you're guessing as it goes. Not to get too far off track, but there's an example of something the NFL made worse in the name of trying to make some money, and I think it's probably going to end up hurting them in the big picture. Anyway, the point is, yeah, there might be some semblance of truth to that, but the NFL remains king, and it remains king by a wide margin. And you're right. I mean, maybe there will come a time where that will plateau, but it doesn't feel like it's happening anytime soon. And from that standpoint, if you're the players, and if you're specifically the best of the best players, I think that's where you do look at, unique circumstances such as a Lamar Jackson trying to get a fully guaranteed deal, or maybe it's Joe Burrow saying, "Hey, I want my contract tied into percent of the cap." So if the cap jumps by this much come 3 years from now, I want to be paid that much more in base salary. Again, I don't know if that will happen, but these agents and these players certainly should be paying attention, and I'm sure are paying attention to just how lucrative this continues, becoming more and more lucrative than it already is. That, yeah, why not? Why shouldn't players get a bigger and bigger cut, especially talking about the stars of the stars, right? Yeah, that to me, that would be the one argument that if you're looking at it from the Ravens perspective, or looking at it from owner's perspective, and say, well, we don't want to give out a guaranteed deal because everyone's going to want one. Well, the simple retort to that is not everyone is Lamar Jackson. So you're talking about a very unique circumstance in that front, in the same way that not everyone is Michael Jordan, not everyone is LeBron James. So, from that standpoint, again, I see both sides of it, but I keep coming back to, if you're the Ravens, how do you win here? If you're any of these teams that are going to have to pay their young star quarterback, knowing how much more lucrative this is getting with the TV deals and all of that, I do wonder if it just becomes, you're either going to lose that guy, and then you face the wrath of your fan base and the fallout from that standpoint, or at some point you just need to bite the bullet and say, you know what, we really don't want to do this, but I tell you what, we want to do even less than that is lose the player.
Right.
So that's where you kind of come back to it and say, All right. If it comes down to it, yeah, the Ravens will have to do it. In my opinion, at some point they're going to have to do that. Again, assuming Lamar Jackson continues to play at this, even better, 2.0 version of what we saw in his MVP season.
Well, people say that Lamar Jackson is going to take up a huge chunk of the cap, but that's true of any elite quarterback,
Sure.
right? That's the price you pay. That's the price you pay when you draft well, as the Ravens have done for many, many years. They can't afford to keep everybody, but it's superior to picking players that never pan out, right? That's a strategy that's disaster right there. You want your players to develop. You want them to become Pro Bowl, All Pro caliber, and you keep as many of them as you can. But to me, so far, Lamar Jackson, as long as he stays healthy now, as long as he doesn't suffer a career ending or altering injury, he's making more money, but not having an agent, right? Not only has he saved the money on the agent, but had he signed, let's say, a year ago, he would have left money on the table. And the notion that he doesn't, that his mother is pulling the strings, he has competent people around him. He's got the Players Association, but so far, him not having an agent hasn't hurt him. It's been to his benefit.
It has been, but I will say we're still speaking in a hypothetical sense, in the sense that at some point he is going to have to cash in the chips, right?
Absolutely.
And he has to make sure he does that in a way that's going to be beneficial to him. And I'm not saying he won't, but I'm just saying this is still an open-ended book in the sense that the final chapter hasn't come in as it pertains to whatever his contract's going to be. I mean, for all we know, Lamar may end up caving at some point. I'm not saying he should or will, or that I would anticipate that, but until that final chapter comes on this contract anyway, and then we'll get into how long the deal is and
Right.
what happens 5, 6, 7 years from now, whenever it would run out. But yeah, to what you said, I mean, really comes down to, for any of these individuals, if you are willing to take on the risk, and you mentioned the injury, and that applies to anybody.
Correct.
We're talking, we just mentioned Ronnie Stanley. That applies to anyone. Now, some have greater risk than others, but it does speak to what we just said. The cap's, save for a pandemic, the cap is always going up. Revenue is always going up. Team values are certainly going up. I mean, look at what Steve Bisciotti paid when he became, the full owner in 2004 compared to what the team is assessed at now. I mean, it's extraordinary. So, from that standpoint, yeah, I mean, if you're willing to wait and dig in your heels, it does stand to benefit you. But again, as we mentioned, at some point you are going to have to cash in. And I'm not saying that Lamar is wrong for having not done that yet. To your point, he's putting himself in an even better position 3 weeks, compared to where he was 3 weeks ago, even. So again, we'll see how it plays out. And at this point, I don't think there's any reason to believe that anything's going to happen based on the word that the Ravens gave and what Lamar said as far as his intentions. But again, it's still something that we're going to talk about because of, well, you see how important he is to this team every Sunday. And that's not to take anything away from others, but if they didn't have Lamar Jackson, they certainly wouldn't be 3-0 right now. Maybe they'd be 2-1, maybe they'd be 1-2, maybe they'd be 0-3, but he is that extraordinarily important to everything they do. And, that's a major compliment to him. It's a compliment to the Ravens for having selected him 4 years ago. But at some point in time, again, I keep coming back to what constitutes a win for the Ravens here as it pertains to a negotiation and not wanting to give him a guaranteed deal as opposed to giving him a fully guaranteed deal.
Luke, I think the big win for both sides, just 3 games in the season, understanding that there's still a lot of season left to be played, is that this offense has been explosive, dynamic, pass first. This is an offense that you can no longer throw rocks at this point. Hollywood Brown saying the scheme wasn't for him. Rashad Bateman doesn't share that sentiment. Devin Duvernay doesn't. Mark Andrews doesn't, right? Even the running backs. So this offense has been dynamic, and I think it's great that he can thrive in his system, grow in his system with Greg Roman. I think it's also nice he's had the same offensive coordinator now in his 5th year in the league.
Yeah, I think that's probably an understated part of this whole equation here is, let's face it, Lamar Jackson skipped all of voluntary spring activities, OTAs. He skipped voluntary spring workouts, which is fine. But when that happens, and when you're talking about wanting to bounce back from what had been a down year relative to Lamar's previous seasons, and you're wondering, he's working with a different, personal quarterbacks coach, and he's not at the team facility. it's only natural to wonder if he's on the same page with the coaching staff, if he fully buys into what they're doing. That has to be a question there. And we talked about that a little bit. And that's not to say that that definitely was the case, but you have to wonder, especially on the heels of having a season that didn't go as well as they wanted it to. So for this season to be what it is, and let's clarify this a little bit. It hasn't been a dynamic rushing attack so far. Lamar's been dynamic running the ball. The rest of it hasn't been good. Now, showed some promising signs in New England, and certainly J.K. Dobbins coming back is a big part of that. It's been a dynamic passing game. They rank first in the NFL in efficiency with DVOA, Football Outsiders efficiency metric, which is widely used, and even the Ravens look at that. So it speaks to how explosive, how effective, how great their passing game has been through 3 weeks. And again, they have to keep it going. No question about that. And we saw Lamar put up some pretty gaudy numbers last year in terms of pushing the ball down the field early in the season. So you have to keep that going. But it does certainly provide some, at least short-term, temporary vindication for Greg Roman after all the criticism that he's received. Some of it fair, some of it unfair. It certainly vindicates, any questions about James Urban, the quarterback's coach, and certainly would even provide some validation for Adam Tato, the personal quarterback coach that Lamar worked with, whom the Ravens have had at the facility a handful of times to observe and kind of exchange and volley some ideas back and forth. So it's been a team effort, and of course Lamar leading the way in that regard. So that's been good to see. I mean, the worst thing that could happen in a contract year would be kind of a repeat of what happened last year, and not even take out the injury part. Let's just say it's kind of an up and down year. I mean, let's face it, Lamar, look at the touchdown to interception ratio last year. It wasn't very good. So if he has another year like that, one, you're wondering about just the overall performance. Two, that's when you start to wonder, okay, is this a case where Lamar just says, I don't believe in the coaching staff, and I'm ready to peace out and go somewhere else? And I mean, that would be his right if it played out that way. So the fact that they're having so much success, through the air especially, we've talked about this, right? No one is saying you don't want to run the football or don't want to run the football well, but we've talked about it. And Sunday afternoon is going to be a perfect example, although the weather may not cooperate. We may not get that kind of game ultimately, but we've talked about it. The Ravens, Lamar Jackson, for them to take that next step, going toe-to-toe with one of these high-octane offenses that does throw the ball way more and has these dynamic pass-catching targets. And Buffalo certainly qualifies for that. So, we'll see how that works out. Again, the rain and the weather may make this a little more of a ground and pound game for both teams than you would have anticipated under normal circumstances, but be a perfect example. And I'll throw it out, as I mentioned, Buffalo Bills are really banged up in the secondary right now. So you look at this, as much as you can talk about the Ravens, and let's face it, the Ravens secondary, even with the takeaways on Sunday, still really, really messy right now. I mean, we can't just ignore the numbers and say that there aren't some concerns there. But Buffalo, still no Tre'Davious White. He's on the PUP list coming back from the ACL. They lost Micah Hyde. Jordan Poyer's been dealing with the foot, missed last week's game. Dane Jackson, starting corner, missed last week's game. Those guys are practicing, but they're limited. So, you're talking about a secondary that kind of reminds you of the issues the Ravens had last year from a health standpoint. So you're hoping that the Ravens should be able to exploit that and have some success through the air. Again, being a couple days out from game day, not knowing just how bad the rain could be. So, that could certainly change things. But as it pertains to everything we're talking about, with this passing game the way it's looking, it's certainly looking like the kind of unit that would be far more formidable, far more equipped to go into some of those playoff matchups that we've talked about over the last few years with Kansas City, with Buffalo, where you just say, hey, this is going to be a back and forth kind of, you throw, I throw, and we're seeing which team can get one stop at some point in time, like we saw with the Bills and the Chiefs last year, or which team wins the coin toss in overtime, I suppose. It really does become, you get a little more excited seeing what the Ravens been able to do through the air and saying, wow, I mean, this looks like it can go up against just anybody and go toe-to-toe offensively through the air when, didn't feel like they could do that nearly as consistently a few years back.
Great stuff as always, Luke. Before I let you go, just one last comment. Lamar just looks very confident, very comfortable at the line of scrimmage. It looks like he's moving guys around. I mean, he just looks like he's taking complete command of the offense like I haven't seen him do since he got here.
Yeah, it really does. And that's not to say he hasn't done that at all.
Correct.
But I feel like it was still very much the centripetal force was still the running game, and specifically Lamar Jackson as a rusher. But you're seeing him under center. You're seeing him moving his progressions, looking to the right side of the field, looking middle, then looking left. 3-4 different options in the passing game.
And look, and he was looking very nervous when Falele got in there, let up those 2 quick sacks.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, he went through.
I'm being funny here, but he had his head on the swivel for a few minutes there, didn't he?
Oh, no question. And that was where he missed a few throws, right? But to his credit, Falele settled in, and the Ravens got him enough help, and it was fine the rest of the game. Now, depending on if Ronnie Stanley does play Sunday, and I'm not convinced that he's going to, but he's practicing fully now for the first time since coming back. Sure would like to have Ronnie Stanley out there dealing with Von Miller and that Bills front. So, but he very much is in more command. He's seeing the whole field. He's always seen the field well, but it's always been a question of how much they're asking him to do, how complicated, how sophisticated their passing concepts are. And again, I think I mentioned this to you. Go to the QB School, JT O'Sullivan, his YouTube channel, former NFL backup quarterback. Again, someone who has had some criticism for Lamar in the past. Also praised him at times where it certainly was deserving of praise, but at times where he wasn't playing as well, he's pointed it out. He did a breakdown. It's about 25 minutes long, somewhere in that neighborhood, of Lamar in New England, and you just see a guy who's in complete control of the offense right now. And again, this is an offense that still is unconventional relative to the other 31 teams. Maybe not all 31, because I mean, look at Jalen Hurts. Look at what he's doing with that Eagles offense, and big reason why the Eagles are undefeated through 3 weeks. But very much seeing a guy who is doing much more as a passer, a team that is doing much more as a passing offense, and it's fun to watch. And okay, I get it. New England's not great, but they have they field a very competent defense, and they made them look very bad at times because of some of the concepts, and Lamar, using his eyes effectively, and making effective throws away from coverage, and all the different things we've seen Lamar do. And it's not as though it's brand new, but it's just a more expansive version of those things that he's done well in the past as a passer. And that's what's so exciting, because again, we've been waiting for that passing game to take the next step. And even with a 4th string left tackle, even with a group of wide receivers that I'll still say I would have liked to have another wide receiver added to this mix beyond Demarcus Robinson, but I digress on that point. They are playing at a very high level coming out of the gate, and you couldn't be more excited about that as a Ravens fan.
Absolutely. Luke, I appreciate your time and your insight. Please tell our listeners where they can find you on social media, WNST, Baltimore Positive, as well as your great blog.
Absolutely. I encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter at WNST. You can follow me personally at Baltimore Luke, because I'll be live from the press box downtown at the stadium. Ravens, Bills, couldn't ask for a better early season AFC showdown, as the Bills coming off of their loss to Miami, the Ravens having lost to Miami 2 weeks ago. So, kind of play that little game there and kind of see where the pecking order is in the AFC. But check out my blog at BaltimorePositive.com. My latest 12 Ravens thoughts of the final injury report, my 5 predictions for Sunday, post-game reaction, all of that at BaltimorePositive.com. You want to be on the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. Game day inactives, final injury report, any significant roster moves, such as Jason Pierre-Paul, his deal being finalized just a few days back. All of that news, plus any other significant local sports news, sent directly to your mobile device via the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. And of course, anything throughout the week on AM 1570 with Nestor. Ravens players and coaches interviews, final season, or a final series of the season early next week at Camden Yards, sound from the ballpark. All of that at BaltimorePositive.com.
All right, Luke, I appreciate you. Hopefully next week we'll be talking about the 3-1 Baltimore Ravens versus the 2-2 Ravens.
Yeah, no question about it. It'll be a big deal breaking that one down and then getting ready for Cincinnati, right? It doesn't stop. It's a big 2-week stretch for the Ravens early on in the season, that's for sure.
All right, my friend. Looking forward to it. Stay well.
Thanks, Dennis.
My pleasure. There he goes, Luke Jones here, 1570 AM, Baltimore Positive WNST. We'll take a quick break and come back right after this.